Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. If you're new to The Authority File, you can listen to and find previous episodes on most of the major podcast platforms, and we encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter, The Authority File Roundup, which keeps you updated on previous, current, and upcoming episodes. You can subscribe at choice360.org by clicking on the newsletter banner at the top of the homepage. My guest for this four-part series is Dr. Rebecca Cooney, chief editor of a new Nature journal, Nature Mental Health, set to debut in January 2023. Dr. Cooney and I discuss health equity in mental health, what that looks like from a clinical perspective as well as an academic one, and how the new journal will be addressing that across its entire editorial production process. This series is brought to you with support from Springer Nature. In this third episode, we discuss how scholarly publishers can go beyond pledges and good faith statements to put DEI policies into practice. Okay, so let's talk about how journals might put, some of the pledges and statements that they make up front. How do they put these ideas into practice? How might Nature Mental Health use its editorial strategy, its acquisition, or its peer review, which you mentioned earlier in an earlier episode, and other editorial functions to incorporate, say, anti-racist policies?
I think pledges are actually a really useful start, and they're sort of like the New Year's resolution of a journal.
Yeah.
That by communicating that what you're hoping to do, you're formalizing it into an agreement with the audience, and audiences will definitely hold you accountable to these ideas. And there have been, especially at the level of a lot of the major medical journals and major society journals, sort of these expressions of various aspects of DEI that they want to espouse in their journals. And a lot of times it comes from having a major sort of dust up that is very public, and that then, the mea culpa is to sort of do these things. We've been really lucky in that, being a new journal, we can sort of put those New Year's resolutions to work from the get-go, and then also, in the sense that we will be monitoring how we do. We have baseline starting from the very beginning, and so there are a few things that we're actually actively looking to do, and one is to have. Because Nature doesn't use editorial boards, we are looking at having two sort of advisory boards. So both a scientific advisory board that will weigh in sort of on the general trends of different topics that we're including. Might there be disciplines that or sub-disciplines that we want to include that we haven't yet, and making those connections. But then also doing a lived experience advisory board where we bring people who from different backgrounds, but that we help sort of get savvy with the reviewer process, and that who can bring some of their own perspectives in, and to help us know that we're on the right track in terms of how we are talking about disorders, for example, or which facets of research are we actively including. So we're hoping to really use that as a way to kind of to keep us very close to the communities that, in essence, this whole sort of endeavor is to serve. So that's one area. Other areas we do really editorially, from peer review. We have kind of an internal mandate that we always invite at least one woman out of the set of 3 or 4 reviews that we get. We really look for lower and middle income country reviewers, because there's so much work done where it's, people who are in a high income country conducting work somewhere else. And it's really important to have the perspective of somebody in that setting to advise. we're also, in terms of what we commission, and trying to get perspectives and comments from people who may have been traditionally sort of shut out of the academic publishing arena, and that may even be people who aren't sort of traditional academics, but people who are doing work that bears on mental health constructs or in the community, and to really just to give a chance to to readers to have access to this. So it's almost a journalistic approach to the
Right.
editorship, but really trying to blend all of those pieces together.
Yeah, excellent. So, as you've described, efforts like this can impact the advancement of equity in mental health. But I'm curious what might be the sort of, so to speak, collateral effects institutionally and in academia as well.
Well, I think, one sort of chronic tension that there's always been between sort of traditional publishing and academia is who gets credit for all of this, um, you know, all of this brain power that's applied to a publication that you don't see.
Mm.
And so I think we need to be really big proponents as editors of other creative ways of giving people credit for the work that they do as part of this process. It is very community based, and I think that when we have people sort of having arguments around open access, for example, or it takes away somewhat from the conversation that it is a community based process in peer review,
Yeah.
and that having these different players in it, but only the sort of end result person is getting credit out of this system. So that may mean doing a better job of getting review sort of recognition through publons, or with the academic institutions themselves, or to have our journal recognize when people have really gone above and beyond to provide excellent reviews. It's also a really interesting situation that's in that the people who decline reviews often are the people who would end up giving the best reviews. And we have some bibliometrics on this that, women are more likely to decline doing a review because they're worried that during that time they won't be able to produce the quality of review that they know that they're capable of and would like to give you. And that's a real shame. I think that there's also, we do get questions from reviewers about, well, was my review sufficient? Was this good enough? And so we also have a real place, I think, to do reviewer training. And because so many people, their only sort of experience with reviewing comes from, if their advisor said, can you take a look at this paper for me? And so, and even in areas where people have even fewer resources, or there are fewer institutions in general, we really have a place, I think, to go in and help people learn what is expected during the review process and what makes a good review. And it's a mutually beneficial way of doing things.
Yeah. Are there tactics that a journal team can use to, just going back to your example about women reviewers declining opportunities, to sort of support them, to sort of, help them agree to do a review?
Yeah, we've been experimenting and nothing formalized yet
Yeah.
because it's really sort of an ad hoc basis. But, if we can relax the timeline, for
Yeah.
example, everyone uses sort of boilerplate invitations, but
Mm.
on occasion, if we know that there's the beginning of school, for example, how do we relax the timeline a bit so that someone who may be sort of dealing with pressures of home life as well, to a greater extent, would have a little bit more flexibility there. We've also been talking with different potential contributors about how we can make their life easier, about getting, a comment, for example, that maybe having someone sit down and write something out for you and go through the traditional revision process is a lot more onerous than, say, let's have let's tape our next chat, and then we'll have one of the in-house editors kind of put it on the page and massage it and send it to you to take a look at. So ways to just sort of ease the channels for people who are disproportionately affected in that way. But also, I think it really means kind of reading the contributor a bit too, to see where are their pain points and what could we potentially do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Also curious, sort of on the research end of things, how publishers might generate equitable practices further upstream, with research practices in terms of whose research is being selected and published.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are lots of different ways that I think publishers are working on this. Nature just announced some health equity grants that prizes that they're doing, and this is to really showcase different types of equity research that's being undertaken that might traditionally not have the main sources of funding. So there are kind of the high level publishing ways in which we can help seed the landscape. And I think that will be really exciting. That's a sort of a joint venture with Scientific American that will take the next 3 years as a pilot. And then beyond that, I think that, we really have to be better partners and up to speed on a lot of the funder mandates and what is sort of happening within, the sort of funding ecosphere of what they're looking at to improve their processes. And here I think a really interesting example is to look at the International Alliance of Mental Health Funders and some of the work that they're doing around lived experience reviewers and involving people from very early on, and as having that as a stipulation of a grant. So I think that there are multiple ways and multiple intervention points that we have to kind of massage in order to produce results here. But I think it's something that publishers are very interested in doing, and those of us who are editors being sort of at the receiving end of what what blooms out of that are really interested in it as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I kind of want to bring this home a little bit to our librarian audience. So I'm curious to see how you see these issues shifting the functions of librarians. Like, how does this all kind of trickle down to the librarian?
I think it all trickles down to the librarian in essence. So I think that the very nature of how work is published is changing very rapidly, and it's changing to the point where those of us who are in it are not even sure what's coming down the pike next. So there is a lot of sort of bracing for what could happen or what should happen, and then there's also sort of the day-to-day functions. And I think librarians are caught in this very complex race as well, and trying to make sure that they can still deliver the services that they need to researchers and academics in their institutions. And so part of it, I think, is making sure that we talk about these things more, period, because it's amazing just sort of the heterogeneity of understanding what certain sort of mandates are, the OSTP mandate, for example. How do we interpret that? How do we interpret it together? What we think this might mean for us, and I think that that's sort of it really should happen on a much more frequent periodicity than whenever an announcement comes down. So I think trying to foster ways where we bring people who are stakeholders from the libraries and journals together, and also researchers who get shut out of a lot of these conversations about how the different sort of practices might affect them as well. So it's a lot of pressure, I think, to put on librarians being kind of the point people of having to sort all of this information out and to be kind of coherent and experts on this. But I think it's going to mean a lot of more creative ways too of bundling information, and that is going to have major impacts, I think, for librarians as well. So how do we do different collections around different themes. I think themes are so important right now in terms of, helping to get to sort of the DEI ideals, because it really means, very finely combing through work that sort of supports these ideas, or how do we want to showcase different work, or who do you want to showcase within your institution. I think that's also going to have some really interesting bibliometrics that come out of it, and how, what's actually working, what's not working, how the data is curated. This is going to be another major way that it's really the headache of the century, that trying to figure out how do we sort of aggregate data and then disaggregate data in a way that is helpful and useful, and actually can spur, it's part of transparency, but it's also sort of an efficiency issue, and that, all of these millions and millions of dollars that are, brought into this, that we ultimately require the massage of librarians and information managers. And without them, it's really a wasteful process. So I think partnering to figure out how we might better do that is really important, and not just in the U.S. I mean, it's already a huge problem in the U.S., but imagine then, dealing with sort of these multi-international clinical trials, and and then having industry stakeholders involved as well. So I think bringing everyone to the table there as well. And also, I think the role of a librarian is probably going to fundamentally change within the next 5 to 10 years. And that's a whole set of competencies that we may not even know yet. And so it's a really interesting space to watch develop and develop in real time. And I think, another place that really benefits from, editors having a good understanding of what the librarians are doing and what they need and what we can be doing better.
Right. Absolutely. You just heard from Dr. Rebecca Cooney, chief editor of a new Nature journal called Nature Mental Health. Join us next week as we discuss the dynamic of open access and subscription models in the context of equity in academic publishing, how this impacts the role of librarians, and why mental health is considered the last frontier. This series is brought to you with support from Springer Nature.
So I think it's the last frontier in that it really invites a more nuanced approach to how we look at work that affects mental health, and to broaden that sort of field. So, we realize that when we have sort of massive public health crises like the pandemic, that can affect mental health very broadly. It can also affect, individuals very acutely. But understanding that there's an interplay between these sort of high level and very public sort of events, and the sort of private and emotional experience of wellness.
As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.